Hello, everyone. My name is krwrobetz. I am a lecturer in the Department of Business Administration at Kobe Gakuin University and currently a PhD candidate at Kyoto University in Japan. My doctoral research is examining the efficacy of utilizing digital games as a part of the curriculum in foreign language classrooms with a focus on the mechanisms of L2 vocabulary acquisition from gameplay, as well as how digital games may impact the perception of the target language culture. In this presentation, I will be giving you a brief overview of which types of digital games are the most conducive to second language acquisition and some of the theoretical frameworks being used to explain the relationship between digital games and the language learning process. Then we'll move on to the methodology of my doctoral research using the game Life is Strange to examine its effect on L2 vocabulary acquisition. Then we will break down some of the preliminary results, which suggest that single-player RPGs are effective tools for vocabulary acquisition. Then we'll wrap the presentation up with a brief discussion about the implications of these results, as well as the direction of future research. So a lot of the research looking at how digital games may be used to foster better language learning, both in and out of the classroom, has been focused on massively multiplayer online role-playing games, which, as the title would suggest, involve a large network of players interacting in an online gaming environment. In particular, the interactive nature of the gameplay combined with the gameplay mechanics conducive to SLA makes games like World of Warcraft potent pedagogical tools. In particular, non-native English speakers who play the game in English not only have to communicate with other players in English, but they must also understand the content of these linguistic exchanges in order to successfully participate in the game. The game also makes use of story-driven elements, which provides meaningful context for the in-game lexical items, and it also requires the player to actually comprehend the gameplay elements in order to advance in the game. So the difficulty of incorporating games like World of Warcraft into formalized educational environments notwithstanding, research has identified a number of correlations between informal use of games and overall pedagogical performance. It was found, for example, that students who engage in online cooperative games like MMORPGs in a foreign language not only improve skills in that foreign language, but also in their native language. Furthermore, the pedagogical efficacy of games to elicit gains in L2 vocabulary are affected by the perception of the game's usefulness as a language learning tool. And finally, the design of many commercially successful games which teach the player how to play the game as they are playing the game, with these gradual increases in difficulty, is not only effective, but is also sound pedagogical theory. So this is not to say, however, that all digital games will be conducive to learning a language. Some SLA research has pointed out that the interactive nature of games may actually distract the player from acquiring L2 vocabulary. Although games are very good at teaching players how to play the game well, the pedagogical outcome may be just that, playing the game well. A number of, or a study in particular looking at the rhythmic action game Parappa the Rapper 2 found that non-native English speakers who played the game in English did not acquire as much L2 vocabulary in post-game tests relative to a control group who merely watched the game being played. One important factor that might be determining the level of L2 vocabulary acquisition from digital gameplay is how much the player needs to comprehend the linguistic content of the game itself. In a study by Sylvan and Sundqvist, they found that among a group of Swedish elementary school students who played digital games in English outside of school, students who played online cooperative games like MMORPGs had more linguistic gains in English than students who played offline single-player games such as The Sims. In contrast to games like Parappa the Rapper, which require a high degree of technical controller skill, simulation games like The Sims should not really cause all that much cognitive overload. The common element at play here seems to be the level of linguistic comprehension needed to interact with the game. When compared to more story-oriented offline single-player RPG titles like the Final Fantasy series, offline simulation games such as The Sims require a lot less overall linguistic comprehension in order to interact with the game. So the question that needs to be asked now is whether the L2 linguistic gains seen in players of MMORPGs are entirely the result of interactions between human players, or whether the story-oriented RPG gameplay mechanics are also a factor. So looking once more at the list of potential benefits to SLA associated with MMORPGs, we can start to identify points of commonalities with single-player RPGs. Although there are no features which allow for linguistic production between players, there is a sort of negotiation of meaning that occurs as scripted discussion of in-game events, not necessarily between players, but rather between the player and non-playable characters and the gameplay mechanics themselves. Again, single player RPGs do not directly foster productive language skills such as speaking, but they may foster interaction between players outside the game through discourse communities. Not all single player RPGs make use of voice acted content, but fortunately, a large number of modern titles do, which would be good at fostering listening skills. And again, productive language skills such as writing are not being fostered, but rather many RPGs make use of script choices, which require the player to understand the language being used and then to make appropriate responses based on that in-game dialogue. So with the potential for the gameplay mechanics of single-player RPGs to be as beneficial to SLA as MMORPGs, more research needs to be conducted on this particular genre of game. So for my doctoral research, I chose to use the single-player RPG title Life is Strange, based in part on specific gameplay mechanics which may be particularly effective at eliciting L2 vocabulary acquisition. For one, the game is voice acted and features English subtitles of all the dialogue throughout the game, and players are forced to make the correct script choices in order to move the game forward, which requires them necessarily to understand the linguistic content of the game. And if the player is unable to progress the game forward, there's this time reversal function, which may help to reduce any cognitive overload by allowing the player to hear and read dialogue again and again. Finally, the title is available on smartphones, which may foster a more conducive environment to independent learning in large-scale classrooms. So next, let's take a look at how I am measuring the efficacy of utilizing Life is Strange as a language learning intervention in a formal academic setting. So all study participants in this study are majors in the Department of Business Administration at a private Japanese university. The student's English level is between novice high and intermediate low using the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Language guidelines. 4 students have native languages other than Japanese, but these students were required to have an N1 qualification, which is the highest level of qualification on the Japanese language proficiency test, which is necessary because the testing procedure makes use of Japanese translations of in-game content. There are, as of the end of the fall semester of 2020, 124 total participants in the study, but 24 students did not complete the gaming schedule, and therefore the data presented in the study are based on 104 participants. The students are divided into 2 groups, the game group and the control group. Before each gaming session, the game group is shown a list of words and sentences in which they appear that the group will be tested on after each gaming session is over. Then they play the game. The students are then told that they cannot use any dictionaries either while playing the game or taking the vocabulary tests, and they are also informed that the scores they receive on the tests will not affect their grade and that their project score will be entirely determined only by the successful submission of the tests on time. The control group undergoes the exact same testing procedure, except that the control group is not shown a list of the test items before they take the test. But these test items are exactly the same, so the control testing method is exactly the same as the game group, but the only extra piece of information the game group has is the experience of gameplay. 45 words and the sentences in which they appear were selected from the game as test items. Only words from mandatory gameplay sequences were chosen, as there are lots of optional dialogue sequences throughout the game. Words that contain multiple translations were prioritized for selection, as ass and a number of words associated with ass seem to have a very flexible meaning in English. A number of words in that language family made it onto this list. Booty, for example, which can also mean ass, is actually used to describe a treasured possession of one of the characters in the game. The testing schedule and gaming schedule takes place over 5 weeks. On week 1, participants are given a 45-question pre-test to serve as a baseline for knowledge of the test items. Immediate tests 1, 2, and 3, which consist of 17 questions, 13 questions, and 15 questions respectively, are given on weeks 2, 3, and 4 respectively. The post-test of 45 questions is given on week 5. Students are then invited to participate in a 1-semester delay post-test at the end of the semester, but participation is entirely voluntary. The questions on the test look like this: a sentence with a word in parentheses. The student must then select the appropriate Japanese translation based on the context of the sentence. The answer selections include one strong distractor, similar in meaning to the test item, in this circumstance, wheel and not car, one moderate distractor, this would be bicycle, and one answer to another test item from the list of 45 questions, in this circumstance, seriously. So these multiple choice questions are presented in English with Japanese answers, mainly to eliminate no answer responses. So because the student's project score is not based on performance, but rather on submission of the tests, the possibility of students handing in tests with "I don't know" written for every response is very real, and so a multiple choice format was employed instead. The questions feature the full sentence from the game script in which the word appears for context. Answer order is automatically randomized for each test. Questions do not appear in the same sequential order as the words appear in the game. The students are given absolutely no corrective feedback on the pre-tests, but all remaining tests, from the immediate tests to the post-tests, have corrective feedback. The answers from the tests are presented after submission of the test and not emailed to the students, so they can only view it on that one page. So unless they save that page, they will not have access to those answers later for study. The answers from the tests are presented, again, not in email. So let's take a look at some of the data so far. So when comparing the pre-test scores to the immediate test score averages, the scores averaged from tests taken after 3 successive gaming sessions, we see that there was an increase in score of approximately 8% in the game group, with paired two-tailed t-test scores indicating that these differences are highly significant. The Cohen's d value of 0.76 also indicates that the gameplay intervention has a moderately strong effect in inducing higher test scores, which is notable because the only intervention that the students receive at this point is the game. Compared to the control group, there was a 2% increase in test scores with t-tests, indicating that the increase in scores is not statistically significant. However, the t-tests from the results from immediate test 3 are approaching statistical significance, so we must take that into account as well. Furthermore, the Cohen's d value of 0.21 indicates a very weak effect of the testing method, and this testing method is probably inducing slightly higher scores because it's splitting the 45 question test into 3 smaller tests, so there's less cognitive load. After taking the immediate tests, the game group received corrective feedback. The 45 question post-test was given on week 5 of the testing schedule and included a 3-week, 2-week, and 1-week delay for tests 1, 2, and 3. We see a similar increase in score with an overall increase of 11%, which is a 3-point improvement from the immediate test scores, and t-test scores reveal that these increases are highly statistically significant. Furthermore, a Cohen's d value of 0.73 indicates a relatively strong effect size of both the gaming intervention combined with corrective feedback. The control group too received corrective feedback after the immediate tests on the same testing schedule. The increase is notable with a 10-point gain, and t-test results indicating that these increases in score are statistically significant. Furthermore, a Cohen's d value of 0.93 indicates a very strong effect in providing corrective feedback. 19 students participated in the voluntary 1-semester delay for the game group. The overall increase from the gaming and corrective feedback interventions was fairly well maintained, with an average increase of 5% from pretest values. T-test scores reveal, however, that this value is statistically non-significant, but with more data and participants in the 1-semester delay test, these data are expected to change, mainly because there are statistically significant gains in both test 1 and 3. And finally, a Cohen's d value of 0.45 indicates a moderate effect from the intervention method. Participants in the 1-semester delay test from the control group is even smaller. The number is even smaller, with just 8 of the 30 students returning for the test. The results see losses in the gains made from the post-test after corrective feedback, returning to the immediate test gains of about 2%. T-test scores also reveal that these gains are not statistically significant. Finally, a Cohen's d value of 0.13 indicates no effect in the control intervention for the 1-semester delay tests. When looking at an overview of the data from both groups, the differences in intervention effect are noticeable. The game group sees large increases in test scores following the gaming sessions, which are maintained over long periods of delay. The control group does not see statistically significant gains in test scores until corrective feedback is provided, after which the decay rate for vocabulary retention appears to be more prominent. Now, results from the pregame and postgame surveys also reveal statistically significant changes in how students perceive the benefits from smartphone gaming. To the question, what English skill will be improved by playing smartphone games in English, there was a statistically significant increase from pregame to postgame in the number of students who thought that smartphone gaming could improve their listening skills. These results make sense when considering that the game Life is Strange makes use of voice acted content. The pre-game and post-game surveys also reveal statistically significant changes in how students view US culture. To the question, what is your impression of US culture? There was a statistically significant increase from pre-game to post-game in the number of students whose answers included mentions of drugs and crime in the USA. These results are understandable considering that the game features drug use and school shooting content in the story. Finally, results from the pregame and postgame surveys also reveal statistically significant changes in what information sources students use to inform their impressions on US culture. So, to the question, what sources of information do you use to inform your impressions of US culture? There was a statistically significant increase from pre-game to post-game in the number of students who thought that smartphone gaming was a valid source of information to inform their impression on US culture. These results highlight the importance of discussing the accuracy of cultural portrayals in digital games. So finally, we need to talk about how we can increase the baseline. So the superior performance in the game group's immediate test scores is noteworthy, considering that the students are using nothing but the context of the game to improve their test scores. So this opens up a number of opportunities for future research with regard to how we can use other classroom interventions such as content discussion before gameplay and changes in the method of corrective feedback delivery and also longer periods of gameplay and how these interventions may actually improve the baseline. Finally, correlation data analysis is currently being conducted and is revealing predictive factors such as gaming experience, in particular gaming experience in English, and location of gameplay. And these predictive factors might be exploited to achieve better pedagogical results for future implementation of foreign language courses utilizing digital games as a language learning intervention. So finally, the efficacy of utilizing smartphone gaming as a language learning intervention also proved to be highly resilient to the changes in educational formats caused by the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. And it has also raised the question as to the best applications for smartphone gaming with regard to location. Although there's not enough data right now on location-specific results, preliminary data suggest that smartphone gaming is actually more conducive to distance learning than classroom learning. There is a higher than average score for students who played the game in their houses when compared to students who played the game in other locations, such as in cafes or in the classroom. The data collected in the fall of 2019 was before the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, and hence all data were gathered while playing in the classroom. When the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic brought the world to its knees and classes switched to online formats, students had the opportunity to play the game in environments other than the classroom. And these data types were further elaborated upon when learning in Japan in particular was operated both online and in classes in a hybrid method during the fall semester of 2020. More data is being collected right now as learning methods change, but smartphone gaming does seem to be very conducive to shifts in learning styles and has actually been very easy to implement during the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, mainly because all students have access to their smartphones. Right, so that is all of the time that I really have to talk about this topic. Here is a list of my references. I understand that was a very brief overview. It's a very big topic, and there's a lot more to say about it, but in 20 minutes, there's not very much to say about it. If you want to contact me to ask me any questions about this presentation or about this research in particular, you can contact me at my work email, at my personal email, or you can find me on ResearchGate. So drop me a line. Thank you for sticking around to the very end, and happy gaming.